Hello my dear friends, you're in the military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 2nd of June of 2026. And today once again we will talk about the massive attack that took place between the 1st and the 2nd of June of 2026, when the Russians used significant number of drones and missiles. According to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, by 8 a.m. of the 2nd of June of 2026, the Russians used 729 air vehicles. And the most important thing, that this is not the final number. During the day, the Russians continued bombing and attacking the territory of Ukraine, dealing significant damage. During the day, somewhere at 12 p.m. of the local time, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation published a report on the matter of this attack. And the Russians called this attack as a retaliatory strike. The Russians stated that this is the retaliatory strike on the situation that took place in the area of the city of Starobilsk several days ago. And right before this massive attack was carried out by Russians, the President of Russia held a meeting to discuss measures to support the victims and the progress on the investigation into the attack on Starobilsk. The President called the attack on Starobilsk a bloody crime, expressed condolences to the families who lost children and grandchildren in the attack by the Ukrainian armed forces. College students in Starobilsk are set to complete the academic year, and graduates are set to receive their diplomas. Punishment for the preparators of the terrorist attack will be inevitable. Those were the statements made by the President of the Russian Federation right before the Russians began this attack. Also, during the same meeting, the head of the investigation committee made also a lot of very interesting statements. The strike on Starobilsk was carried out from the Kharkiv region by servicemen of the 414th Unmanned System Brigade of the Ukraine Armed Forces, under the commander of Klimenko, reported Alexander Bastrykin, the chairman of the investigative committee. Another important thing, that, as you can see according to this video right now in front of your screens, the Russians were basically reducing to ruins the city of Kyiv. A lot of explosions were recorded through the city, a lot of fire anomalies were recorded. The Russians were attacking objects of energy infrastructure. The Russians were attacking different places that Ukrainians were using to supply, to support, and to service their vehicles. For example, one of the garage cooperatives was destroyed in the western parts of the city, so this one. Lots of explosions were recorded in this area, and according to information we have here, Ukrainians have, for example, a building of Nova Poshta post office. Here we have several different places where Ukrainians have business for selling and purchasing vehicles and cars. And telling the truth, the biggest number of explosions and attacks took place right exactly in this area. But not just places for, let's say, places with vehicles are located or were located in this area. According to information we have, for example, this is the area where the main Intelligence Directorate of the Armed Forces of Ukraine is located. So basically, the Russians probably were trying to hit the intelligence service, the main building and the main office of the intelligence service of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or at least the Russians were trying to send a signal showing the Ukrainians that the next attack could be the last one. During the night and during the evening, we were receiving lots of updates, and this is another video published from the city of Kyiv, and here we can see lots of fires broke out from different places of the city of Kyiv right after the Russians attacked the territory. And as we discussed during the previous video, that this attack differs from the attack that the Russians have carried out since the beginning of the special military operation. Lots of differences, and probably the most important difference is that the Russians, for the first time, or one of the first times, when the Russians used not just 5 or 6 targets across Ukraine, the Russians during the previous 24 hours attacked at least 40 or 50 targets across Ukraine. And this is the most important thing. Probably everybody understands that the Ukrainians are able to protect 5 or 6 targets across Ukraine. They can, for example, protect and defend the city of Kyiv if Russians attack this city. The Ukrainians can protect both the cities of Dnipro and Zaporozhye if Russians attack this area. But we see that the Ukrainians are not able to protect the entire territory of Ukraine when Russians have 40 or 50 targets. And the approximate number of fire anomalies that were recorded during the 2nd of June of 2026. Once again, fire anomalies were recorded through the eastern parts of the city of Kyiv, through the western parts of the city, through the southern part, through the northern parts, and through the central parts of the city of Kyiv. Too many fire anomalies, and it seems that the Ukrainians, had no chances to repel this attack. Pro-Ukrainian sources, of course, report about casualties and injured among civilians, and probably during the upcoming night between the 2nd and the 3rd of June of 2026, the Ukrainians will strike back. And the question is, of course, how the Ukrainians are going to do this, because these days the Russians were trying to establish complete control over the northern and the eastern parts of Ukraine, trying to hit and to destroy as many as possible of parking sites and trucks and vehicles that the Ukrainians might use for as a carriers of Ukrainian drones. But one thing is clear, that in coming hours we will understand everything. Once again, this is the map that was published by different sources, and here we can see how the Russians were using drones, how the Russians were using cruise missiles of Ha-101 type. Here we have Iskander missiles, here we have Zircon missiles, and by the way, pro-Ukrainian sources stated that during this massive attack, the Ukrainians haven't managed to destroy even a single Zircon hypersonic missile, and the sources stated that the Russians, since the beginning of the special military operation, managed to accumulate over 200 Zircon missiles, and the Russians are firing them from Kursk region. Targeting time is only 6 minutes, so it's impossible to do anything but this. Pro-Ukrainian sources report that the Patriot systems are capable of intercepting them, but in Ukraine there is an acute shortage of missiles that were stated by different sources. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation with other towns and cities. Lots of explosions were recorded in the northeastern parts of Ukraine in the city of Shostka. Probably these attacks and these explosions are connected with the situation that the Ukrainians were trying to prepare themselves before attacking deep inside of the territory of Russia, but it seems that Ukraine's plans were ruined. Furthermore, lots of explosions were recorded around the city of Kharkiv. The Russians were bombing and attacking the city itself and the territories around, probably also trying to destroy as many as possible launching sites of the armored force Ukraine that the Ukrainians may use to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. But despite the fact that the Russians try to destroy as many as possible places, towns and sites that the Ukrainians may use for attacks deep inside of the territory of Russia, the Russians haven't managed to avoid this situation. The Ukrainians, as we discussed during the previous video, attacked the territory of Russia using hundreds of drones, and according to updates we received from different places and different directions, it seems that Ukrainians were mainly tasked to attack in the direction of the southern parts of Russia, and a lots of explosions and a lots of videos were received from the area of Ilsky oil refinery. So as a result of the Ukrainian massive attack, the Ukrainians managed to deal significant damage to the Ilsky oil refinery. And this is a very interesting situation because this Ilsky oil refinery is located very close to Crimea, where currently oil crisis is brewing. And the oil crisis is really brewing during the previous 24 hours. Lots of sources stated that the Russians have a plan how to stabilize the situation in this area, but meanwhile we continue receiving updates about significant number of lines and about very huge traffic around gas stations. And we see how the Russians and the locals are trying to get fuel, but to get fuel they need to wait for 3 hours or even more with just one purpose: to receive at least 20 liters of fuel. and this is obviously not something that can be called as a stabilized situation. And as we discussed during the previous videos, the Russians, more precisely the Russian business, refused and rejected an idea to use fuel trucks along M14 roads with the purpose to supply Crimea with fuel. So the Russians are not using this road because the Ukrainians established complete control over the territory, and these days we receive more and more videos of how some people try to probably have another adventure and try to cross this area, but the Ukrainians using Hornet drones control the situation, and when the Ukrainians discover spots another fuel truck, they attack this fuel truck immediately, because the Hornet drones are able to do this. They use AI and they use machinery vision, and if they discover or spot another fuel truck, they attack it. So that is why the Russians are not able to use this road. They are able to use this road. The Russians reject this situation. We're talking about business. Of course, when talking about military forces, they don't have any other option, and even if they lose a vehicle, obviously this vehicle would be replaced. But when talking about business, the situation is a bit more complicated. So that is why the other option for Russians is to use the Crimean bridge. But since 2022, 2023, the Russians the Russians don't allow anybody to use the Crimean bridge for fuel transportation purposes. So it is not allowed by the local legislation. So you cannot use this bridge to bring fuel from the main part of Russia in the direction of Crimea. And currently, there is just only one way how to support Crimea with fuel, secure, more or less stable, more secure way, is to use the territory around the settlement of Chushka. And here we have the port infrastructure for ships that can transfer vehicles from one side to another. So the Russians use this situation. They use ships to transport vehicles, fuel trucks from one side to another. But the most important thing is that this process takes a lot of time. As you can see, this territory is not so big, so this is not an easy job, not an easy situation to redeploy fuel trucks from this side to this one. And but probably this is the only schema that works. But the most important thing, and according to pro-Ukrainian sources, this day a huge concentration of fuel trucks is spotted in this area. And of course, we understand what exactly might happen with this concentration of fuel trucks in this area. There are dozens of them, because it seems that the Ukrainians, and most likely Ukrainians, will try to attack this concentration of fuel trucks. And if it happens, this is going to be a disaster. And by the way, and the most important thing, that this video with fuel trucks was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, by very reliable pro-Ukrainian sources, which most likely has connections either with SBU or probably with the intelligence service, which means that the Ukrainians have already put an eye on this situation, and during the upcoming nights, everything is possible. Furthermore, pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians are ready for the next massive attack, and probably the Ukrainians made this conclusion because during the previous night the Russians were using just useless decoy or empty drones without explosives, so without warheads. So the Russians tried to overload the Ukraine's air defense. Most likely the Ukrainians used their air defense forces, but this attack allowed the Russians to save their drones with warheads, and during the next attack everything is possible. And the sources are saying that the Russians may repeat the massive attack within the next 3 or 4 days. As for the situation on the ground, during the previous 24 hours, small changes were recorded along the line of combat contact. We have changes in the Kostiantynivka direction. During the previous day, pro-Ukrainian sources published report that the Russians improved their position through the western parts of the city of Kostiantynivka, and we continue receiving updates about the situation that the Ukrainians are running away from the city of Kostiantynivka. At least this information today was published by several pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian sources. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians, using small groups, are leaving the city of Kostiantynivka further in the northern direction towards the settlement of Drushkovka. As for the settlement of Drushkovka, today we received a very interesting video from the central part, and according to this video, during the previous days, the Russians destroyed a road bridge in the central part of the city, and at least damaged significantly. And in this video we can see the moments when the Russians were attacking this bridge. So this is a very important video. So this bridge was attacked by Russians, and as you can see, this bridge is located in the central part. There are 3 or 4 bridges in this area, and according to this video, at least one of these bridges were destroyed. The most important thing is that during the previous week we received almost the same video that the Russians destroyed bridges in the central part of Alexeyevka-Drushkovka. We're talking about this territory. So it seems that the Russians are trying to destroy bridges in the Slaviansk-Kramatorsk direction. And as you can see, there is a river. This is the river. You can see this on the map. This is the river of Казённый Торец that connects the river of Seversky Donets and further goes in the southern direction towards the city of Torets. And the Russians, as we can see, have already damaged, destroyed, or about to destroy every single bridge between Drushkovka, Alexeyevka-Drushkovka. Then Russians most likely will shift their focus in the direction of the city of Kramatorsk. So they will cut the territories to the east of the river of Казённый Торец from the territories to the west, which will ease the Russian progress on the ground to the east of the river. So this is a process that is currently taking place. And by the way, today pro-Ukrainian sources reported that Putin indeed believes that the Russians are able to take the Donbas by the beginning of summer or by the end of summer of 2026. So that is why we believe that the main clashes and the main battle are going to take place in this area during the summer military campaign. And this is going to be a very, very difficult but the most decisive battle since the beginning of this special military operation. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.